Please welcome Kyla Torre and Sherry Reynes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session where we're going to be talking about what's been going on in the great state of Texas over the past, actually intensely over the past couple of years, but over the past 20 years. In fact, our title is Evolving Open Education Policy, Texas Higher Education. Dr. Kyla Torre and I are both members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board and are speaking today on behalf of THECB, as we are known. Thank you, Kyla, for that first slide. We're going on to the second slide. We're going to give you a little bit of background about what the sort of baseline about what's going on in Texas, information that has flowed through a couple of statewide studies that have been done very recently, and then tour you through some of the new infrastructure that is being built and some of the opportunities that are now being surfaced for higher education and their work in OER in Texas. Next slide, please. OER is defined in statute in Texas, and this is our definition, which is a little bit different, as you guys can appreciate, I think, from other definitions you may have seen, but this is Texas, a teaching, learning, or research resource that is in the public domain or has been released under an intellectual property license that permits the free use, adaptation, and redistribution of the resource by any person. So that is our Texas statute. Next slide, please. OER in Texas, particularly as I suggested over the past couple of years, has been seen as a solution to the problem of affordability, a very important one. So we have had intense legislative interest in OER over the past 3 years and over the past 2 legislative sessions we've had in Texas. Texas legislature meets every 2 years. And this has been in response to the high cost of instructional materials and the impact that we know affordability has on student retention and completion in higher education. OER and how it addresses affordability also is aligned with our state strategy, which is called 60 by 30 TEX or 60 by 30 TX. It has an explicit student debt goal, which is you can see on the screen. By 2030, undergraduate student loan debt will not exceed 60% of first-year wages for graduates of Texas public institutions. That's a metric that we take very, very seriously. But how did we get here? How do we get to this point where our legislator cares, we have policy and statute, we have resources that have been brought to bear against OER? That present landscape is 2 decades in the making. Next slide, please. So this is just a short, high-level appreciation of some of the activity that's been going on in Texas over the past 20 years. Could not possibly, I think, document all of it. These are just highlights. Way back in 1998, something called the Virtual College of Texas was founded, which was recently rebranded as Digitex. It's a community college-based consortium that shares training information and resources for OER. Incredibly important. In 1999, Rice University founded Connections, which was later renamed OpenStax, 1999, so 21 years of OpenStax. We had a Texas Digital Library consortium that was founded first by 4 Texas Research University libraries and exists today. 2009 through 2014, there was an attempt to put together something called the Texas Learning Objects Repository, which was for Texas public higher education institutions. It was hosted by a variety of different locations, including University of Texas, San Antonio, I believe Alamo colleges as well. It was found not to have, as I guess, in its formation and mission, not enough legs to continue. It was closed in 2014. But in 2012, OpenStax began distributing its first open peer-reviewed textbooks, which is an incredibly notable and important point, both for Texas and for our nation. And a little bit later than that, 2014, THECB, the agency that Kyle and I belong to, did its first study of OER. So some 6 years ago, there was quite intense interest was beginning to build. Next slide. Interest was beginning to build and the Texas legislature weighed in, which is really very important to note. Next slide, please. The first way they weighed in was in 2017 with something called Senate Bill 810. Senate Bill 810, again, responding to that notion of affordability, defined open education resource instructional materials. Our latest definition of OER that we just read to you at the top of this presentation stems from 810. It also called for transparency on the cost of course materials, which is something that in statute we've had for a while, but this was very explicit about the benefit that OER might bring to bear on the cost of instructional materials to students. 810 also asked for recommendations on future steps for adopting OER and asked that THECB do a feasibility study about what that might mean for the state. And very importantly, it established a state finance grant program that would be aimed at faculty specifically at post-secondary institutions and give them incentive to engage with OER. The first round of these OER state grants were accomplished in 2018, and 15 grants were given out. And a second round just closed in this past October with an additional 20 grant awards, development grant awards and implementation grant awards. State development grant awards are given to create new or substantially improved existing OER course content, specifically in the Texas core curriculum by faculty or teams of faculty. And state implementation grants are given to redesign Texas core curriculum courses so that they might include OER content. So these were very specific purposes, very focused again on the Texas core curriculum. Next slide, please. Then 2 years later, 2019, the next legislative session, HB 3652 was passed, and it appropriated additional dollars for OER. In this current year, it appropriated $266,000 and almost $200,000 in our next fiscal year. The purposes were two: additional OER state grants, the 2020 grants we just mentioned, and the creation of a state repository for OER, which was actually a very significant moment in OER in Texas. At around the same time, in 2018 and 2019, two significant statewide examinations of the state of OER in Texas took place. The first was the feasibility study that was required or mandated by SB 810 and executed by the THECB. And the purpose of that report was to consider the feasibility of starting a new state OER repository and to look at other ways to facilitate public access to OER to build and scale OER. The second important study was a collaboration between Digitex, the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and in Education, ISKME, and the THECB. That study focused on the promise of OER with a look at adoption and operation and the issues and challenges involved in doing those things. And that was just done last year in 2019. Next slide. The feasibility report in 2018 made a number of recommendations, of which, as you, I think, noticed, were acted upon by the legislature in our last legislative session. It confirmed that we should develop an open statewide OER portal. It suggested that we need to work with OER Commons to develop and maintain the portal. That is not to basically recreate the wheel, but to actually go with state-of-the-art, best-of-breed practice when it comes to building a portal. And in fact, it talked a lot about how portal links to existing repositories would really be extremely beneficial to any kind of Texas repository we created. The feasibility study talked about incentivizing faculty to adopt, contribute, and submit reviews through the portal. So the portal, in terms of its functionality, should have many nimble and good strong uses. It also suggested that the resources that were going to be developed with states' funds would be Creative Commons licensed, so as open as possible. That was extremely important, according to the feasibility study. And also the notion of having a long-term outlook about what our resources and our awareness and our building capacity and kind of getting OER into the plumbing of Texas higher education might take. So awareness was a very strong theme of the feasibility report findings as well. Next slide, please. I'm going to throw this now to my colleague Kyla Torrey to talk about what we what we learned about the Texas OER landscape as of last year.
Yes. So, hi everyone. We learned a lot through this landscape study about what was going on in Texas last year. I'm curious to see, there are plans, we're sort of in the planning stages of doing this again, and I'm curious to see what's going to happen after COVID. But as of last year, there's a growing commitment to OER in Texas. We surveyed about 100 institutions, 57% were 2-year, 32% were 4-year, and 11% were private. And out of those institutions, 51% either had formal policies and programs in place for OER or were planning on implementing them in the future. So why adopt OER, or why are these Texas institutions adopting OER? So we saw that affordability and access were sort of the key drivers, but that the engagement and teaching and learning benefits of OER also mattered. The institutions who had current OER programs or planned OER programs ranked the importance of their goals, and you see that affordability is definitely at the top. Everybody said that was a key factor, but there are a majority said that student engagement was a factor and open pedagogy. So the teaching and learning benefits of OER are also important to our institutions. The majority of institutions were offering some OER-based courses, but 69%, but typically that made up less than 10% of the overall undergraduate course offerings at the institution. So while OER courses are widespread, it was not a lot of courses at this point. So we looked specifically at the institutions that had both OER policies and programs in place, and looked at what was different about those institutions that sort of drove their OER use and adoption. And we saw that they tended to have a centralized OER committee or office, that they prioritized allocating funding for OER and especially for faculty adoption of OER. That they offered faculty incentives of some kind to encourage using OER. That of course they have library staff who are trained on OER, and that is a very important point. And that they were collecting data and mostly on the financial impact of OER, although some institutions were also collecting data on the teaching and learning aspects, grades and drop withdrawal rates and things of that nature. So pre-COVID, and I'm curious to see what it's going to look like soon, but the discussion about OER was non-standardized across the state. So while we have a Texas definition and statute, and some institutions did adopt that as their sort of written definition of OER, there were 61% of institutions that did not have a written definition of OER at this time. And only one institution that had an open licensing policy in place. So there were also SB 810, which Sherry talked about, mandated course marking for OER. So institutions have to mark which courses in their course catalog use OER. And while that was happening, during this time, the terminology was different across institutions. So some were calling them OER courses, but some were calling free, low cost, affordable, things of that nature. I'm going to talk a little bit about the OER text repository, which is our newest our newest project that we've just launched as of September 1st of this year. Out of the feasibility study that we did, we decided that we would work with the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education, or ISKME, who are the creators of OER Commons, and I'm sure that most, if not all of you, are very familiar with ISKME and OER Commons. And so they helped us to develop this OER text repository and will help us to maintain it. So we did a lot of work on it, starting at the end of the legislative period, and then over the summer, got very intense and then launched September 1st of this year. And all of the materials that are being developed or have been developed with OER state grants or the federal grants that I'll talk about in a minute are going to be available through OER text. There are quite a few materials in there already. We focused on materials not necessarily created by Texas institutions, but that were being most used in Texas. And we sort of narrowed it down in the beginning, at least, to our Texas core curriculum. Those are our general education courses. We thought, we talked to a lot of institutional representatives about this, and the idea was that there are quite a few excellent materials for those introductory type courses that are OER, and those are also high enrollment courses, so we could get the biggest bang for our buck off the bat if we focused there and expanded the repository from that point. So I'm just going to show you OER text real quickly. This is it. It's oertext.highered.texas.gov, and if you're familiar with OER Commons, you'll see that it sort of looks a lot like it. The structure is very much like OER Commons. It does have, the differences are that we sort of aligned the metadata subjects with our Texas core curriculum courses, as well as other metadata that made sense for Texas, working with some Texas librarians at various institutions. And you'll see that our course inventories, which are our academic course guide manual for lower division academic courses, and then our workforce education course manual are in here. And courses and materials can be aligned to those course manuals. We also have a variety of collections which we will be building on moving forward, but some are based on subjects like OER Basics, some are materials that are made by Texas institutions like the University of Texas at Austin, and of course OpenStax, we claim them because they're in Texas. So we have those sort of just, and a collection is just kind of a shelf of resources. It's a list of resources that come from that particular institution or revolve around that particular topic. And then we also have hubs within the site, which are kind of like mini sites within the site. And you'll see that some of our institutions are building these right now. Alamo Colleges has one. And this is information specific to Alamo Colleges. And then resources that, while they are available through the main site, they're organized here for Alamo Colleges in such a way that it makes sense to their faculty. I'm going to talk about our sort of plan for momentum for this site. So we just launched in September, and we're reaching out to institutions in an ever expanding basis to try and work with them to populate it with successful OER. We're talking to various institutions and organizations across Texas about this, partnering with them. So these are what we say to explore, create, and collaborate. These are the various ways that you can get involved in the site for our institutions and other partners. As you see, there are a lot of different ways, from adopting OER to designing OER to using the sort of social media aspects of the site to collaborate on creating OER. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going in the future. So the GEAR funding is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funding that came out of the Federal CARES Act during the coronavirus pandemic. And Texas higher education received $175 million in funding from the GEAR funds. The vast majority of that funding is going to go towards direct student support, but a portion of it will be used for online learning support, including a digital learning clearinghouse, which I'm not going to go into too much because it's not OER specific. It's more for best practices around digital learning in general. But then we have OER course implementation grants and technical assistance grants. So we built on the ideas of the state grants, where we have grants for developing new OER or grants for implementing existing OER. But we're trying to expand the focus of these. So while we're still trying to build OER for the most frequently transferred Texas core curriculum courses, we're also expanding to co-requisite courses, which are our college readiness courses, developmental education, and then workforce courses in high need areas. And along with this, these GEAR grants and course development and implementation that we're going to be giving out, the application period for this is open as we speak. So these are hot news. But we also have technical assistance. We partnered with 3 institutions to offer assistance in a variety of forms, including webinars and help with, once the grants are awarded, help with instructional design and things like this. And so we partnered with OpenStax at Rice, the Dana Center at the University of Texas at Austin, which has a lot of experience with the co-requisite courses, and then Dallas College, who's going to be helping with the workforce courses. Okay, I'm going to put this down so that we can, in our last couple of minutes, have some questions or discussion. So, yeah, I would say either if you have any questions or if you want to talk about anything that's going on in your state that's either different or similar, we would love to hear that. So you can either chat or unmute yourself and say hello. We're open to either.
So we, Idaho would love to chat with Texas about OER policy. Sure would.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't put up, let me share one more time. I'll put up our contact information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, we have the URL for the repository there, the website where you can find out more information about the grant program, and the email for the grant program for me and for Sherry. So if Idaho or anyone else, if you want to talk more about what's going on in Texas, please feel free to reach out.
By the way, I'll just put in, if there are no questions, I'm going to put in a plug. Our Commissioner Harrison Keller is going to be one of the plenary speakers at 1 o'clock today. We're excited about it. I'm imagining he's going to mention some of this, which is going to be terrific.
Yes.
Okay, we have a question.
Hi, this is Carrie. I have a quick question about.
Hi, Gary.
What was the other legislation that was passed recently related to the dual credit and early college courses looking at OER? I know I've heard about it, but I feel like there hasn't been much emphasis on that or awareness surrounding that.
It's true. We did develop rules around it. It came out of, I believe that came out of SB 810 as well in 2017. It's just the idea that when developing dual credit courses, OER materials have to be considered, is the word that they use. So you have to sort of, I guess, show in some way that you've thought about using OER resources, at least for the dual credit courses, which are our high school and college credit courses.
Thank you, Kyla and Sherry. This ends the formal session, and I'm going to turn off the recording.